I would say that I was living two worlds, a very dichotomous type of situation where here I was having a relatively successful medical practice, been in the military, had a number of things going my way, feel like I was competent in this area, but having a wife and four children and feeling like I was not very successful at home. So I was living a life here in my profession, but living very differently at home.
Welcome to the Masterful Man podcast. I'm your host, Sven Masterson, coach, mentor, author, and fellow traveler on the path to mastery. Every man reaches the point where he knows he can't keep living the way he has been. The question is, what comes next? Here, you'll hear from men who've made the shift, men who've gone from stuck to unstuck, unshakable, and unstoppable. If you're ready to start moving forward, you're in the right place. Today I'm sitting down with Brian, a pain management physician, military veteran, husband, and father of four. On the outside, he had it all: career, success, stability, and a great reputation. But inside, he was stuck. He was waiting for everything to fall apart, feeling like a failure at home, resentful in his marriage, and desperate to find a way forward. In this raw and honest conversation, Brian shares how he went from living in anxiety and frustration to reclaiming his confidence, rebuilding intimacy, and leading his life from the inside out. If you've ever felt like you're holding all together externally while struggling on the inside, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Well, welcome, Brian. Thank you for being on the show, and thank you for taking the bold and courageous step of being the first episode guest. Before we get into your story, why don't you tell us a little bit about just some basic demographics? Who are you? Where are you? What do you do when you're not on podcasts and so forth?
This is my first podcast, so virgin territory for me. So I live in northern Utah. We're about 90 minutes north of Salt Lake and in a very picturesque area of the state. I'm a pain management physician. I went through anesthesia training at Mayo Clinic back in Minnesota. I did an additional year of training there to learn how to become a pain management physician. And so my practice is now full-time in pain management. I've given up the anesthesia side, but I'm married, been married 30 years now, 31 here in about 2 months. I've got 4 kids. I've got 2 boys and 2 girls. The oldest one's married. The second one is actually living abroad in Indonesia. He's serving a volunteer proselyting mission for the church we belong to. He's been there for 6 months. And I've got 2 girls at home, a beautiful redhead who's a junior and a spicy blonde 14-year-old that makes our life interesting and full and happy.
Well, thank you for that introduction. If we had met you a few years ago, let's just say 5 years ago, how would you have described yourself? Like, how did you see yourself as a man, as a father, as a husband, as a leader? And what kind of mindsets and philosophies did you live by at that time?
It's a very good question. I would say that I was living two worlds, a very dichotomous type of situation where here I was having a relatively successful medical practice, been in the military, had a number of things going my way, feel like I was competent in this area, but having a wife and 4 children and feeling like I was not very successful at home. So I was living a life here in my profession, but living very differently at home. And I think as I examine those two, there was a lot of anxiety between, while in my practice, like fearful of, okay, I've got all these people to support, people that work for me, patients that are coming in the doors. I remember distinctly feeling for many years, waking up and the first thought being, what is going to happen today to unravel all of this?
You mean like
When's
a
it all
waiting?
going to go away?
Like a waiting for the other shoe to drop kind of feeling?
Exactly. Waiting for
Okay.
the shoe to drop, thinking this can't be real, almost like an imposter syndrome type of situation where didn't feel like it was sustainable. And so there was some anxiety, some underlying fear of the future, anxiety about just dealing with the complexities and the demands of a busy medical practice. And then, but succeeding despite that, succeeding and having a good profession. And then going home and trying to come home or go home to what I felt like was the most important part of my life and feeling like a complete failure. Couldn't hold it together. Uh, Relationship with my wife was tenuous. Didn't feel like the relationship with my children was always as close as I would have liked it to be. Looking back on all of that, I think there were some underpinnings that affected both areas of my life. And it took me a long time to figure that out.
Do you mind if I invite you to go a little deeper on some of this?
Please.
Just into, like tell us a little bit more about this kind of struggles and the related emotions that you are having at home. Specifically, let's start with marriage. We can talk about fatherhood in a minute, but what was going on in marriage emotionally, but also, the frustration. I heard you mention some frustration there, and I'm curious to scratch that itch a little bit.
Well, I think the difficulty I was having at home, especially with my wife, was I felt like a constant failure. Like I could literally not do anything right. And if things were good, then it would just be a matter of time before the shoe did drop. And I was constantly, feeling like I was walking on eggshells, wondering, okay, when is that shoe going to drop? And because it's good right now, but I know it won't be. And I was living in this constant fear of what can I do? What can I say? What can I do that's just the right thing that's going to make sure that the relationship is okay, that I won't upset my kids or I won't upset my wife so that we could just live in peace and harmony. Trying my best to avoid any difficult conversations. And my wife would be the first one to tell you that I became a master at that, avoiding any difficult charged environment. Didn't want to do it. My wife is very good at that. She would bring these things to me and want to talk about it, and I would push her back, downplay it, belittle her because she was bringing it up, because I viewed that as well, why would you ruin the good feelings that we have between each other by bringing this up? This is now your fault. I feel horrible and now you feel horrible because you brought it up. And if you just wouldn't have brought these things up, then we could have been living in peace and harmony. Then that went on for years, not months, not weeks, but years. Created a lot of turmoil within me. And of course, you can imagine what that did to my wife as well.
Would you have said that you had an ideal version of your wife that you were striving for in marriage?
Yeah,
and I know this is sensitive to talk about, right?
Yeah. You and I've talked about this a lot over the last 3 years. So I think every married couple does, right? I think my wife has an idealized version of me that's sitting out there on a pedestal that her ideal husband would look and do and just operate in these ways. Well, yeah, of course. My wife, I had that version of her. And so whenever I had that version in my head, right center and front and foremost, and the things happening in front of me were not meeting that idealized version, then I blamed the heck out of her. I resented her. I made it all about her. This is all your fault. This isn't going well because it's your fault. And, I didn't hide that. I would actually say those things. And I know it hurt her deeply. And it led us to go through marriage counseling. We've probably been through a combined 5 years, maybe, of marriage counseling through different therapists spread out through different states. None of it really, really stuck or helped us. But those are some of the struggles that I think I dealt with and that I blamed her for.
Yeah, I heard you mention resentment and blame. Do you feel like those were kind of the most common and frequent emotion, or would you say something else was more common?
No, it does boil down to that. Resentment and blame. And then once I did dwell on that, then I felt an intense amount of shame. Like, how is the good husband responsible for that? How can I be a good husband that I'm trying to be, that I've been taught to be, or so I thought I was taught to be, through friends and family and my church affiliations, but didn't ever really feel like I got the training that I needed in that area. But no, resentful, and then felt intense amount of shame because of what I was feeling. I just had a very, very hard time. And then, of course, I turned it back on the people around me. Like, it's your fault that I'm feeling this way. You said this, or you did this, or if you would only do this, if you would just keep the house clean, for crying out loud, right? There's so many things, demands that I placed on my wife when we had little kids at home. We had 3 kids under the age of 4.
Let's be specific here. And the reason I want you to do that is because, and it's not in any way to trash talk your wife, because I know you don't feel the same way. The reason I want to invite you to go a little deeper here is because men, when I talk to them, find out they are staggeringly similar to other men in what they want, their complaints. So I want our listener just to feel like, wow, this guy's like me, right? You mentioned a little bit, right? You like to keep yourself tidy, it sounds like. And so that was a frustration for you. What else was a frustration that you feel like you can say without dishonoring yourself or your wife?
I would say the frustration I had, and it took me a long time to come back to this. And I think I'm just going to answer that question, then move on a little bit to answer further. The reason why I think that compounded and became more and more of an issue is the crucible of some of the experiences we were going through was intense medical training at an institution that demanded excellence, demanded near perfection at Mayo Clinic. It was incredibly difficult. My insides were not right. So therefore, under this period of pressure, I would come home and then I just want peace and calm and serenity. Just walk through the door and have it given to me, right? I want to walk away from the stress of this job, my training, the job that I got after that, and walk through the door and have it be peaceful, right? Despite the 3 little kids running around and the one who was 7 years older than that. But I expected that it be given to me, right? I wanted my wife to see the efforts that I was making and just automatically shower me with love and affection and appreciation when I wasn't giving it to myself. I was expecting her to give it to me and walk into a situation and get peaceful, get calm. Everyone in this house, make me this way. I want to see my environment give it to me. I don't want toys around or a messy house. I wanted essentially looking on the outside to fix my insides. So, and then of course, on top of all that, what did I want? I wanted intimacy. And it's crazy to think about it now that here I was being this person, probably not very attractive emotionally, frankly, behaving like one of the kids and expecting my wife to want to be physically close to me in that way. I think it's very difficult for women in general, as I'm learning. So yeah, I wanted all of it. I wanted the peace. I wanted the calm. I wanted the admiration. I wanted the respect. And I just wanted the intimacy to flow outward in.
And it sounds like you might have, well, let me ask you, instead of telling you what it sounds like, how entitled did you feel to those things? I mean, you are, you're a clinic, trained physician, and you put all this time into your life, and you didn't mention this, but I happen to know you're an Eagle Scout. You're like a accomplished person in military. And so did you feel entitled to these things?
Absolutely. And I can't imagine the ickiness that exuded, right, for my wife. That I don't think there's anything less attractive than that kind of needy, hey, you owe this to me, or you need to give this to me, because why would you not, right? I'm all this and all that, when really I wasn't. The outside accomplishments, I don't regret being involved in any of those. They're part of my upbringing. I grew up in scouting, loved every minute of it as a kid. Went through schooling, happened to be blessed to join the military, and served overseas in a couple of deployments. All of those things have helped shape who I am, but I had the cart before me. I was pushing this cart along and throwing all of these things in the cart like at a grocery store, right? Like, well, I'm this and I'm that. And, it's walking outside of who would not want to pick anything out of that cart and have free reign at it, right? But I had it backwards.
So were there any other repeated conflicts that were coming up for you with your wife? What were some of the warning signs that kind of started to clue you in that something was not going like you wanted it to?
Well, I think the canary in the coal mine was, I think the first thing to drop off when things get difficult is intimacy. And when it gets really difficult, when the conversations around intimacy are not fun, are not natural, are not giving from one to another, it's forced, it seems owed. That is the canary in the coal mine. When that started to become difficult, I still wasn't getting it because I still didn't think I was the problem, right? I was this constantly thinking, if you, wife, woman, just fix this, get yourself together in this way so that I can order my insides around and feel better about myself, life will just be grand. In fact, I remember one time telling her, this is incredibly raw, but I will admit this. I told her, you know what? If I could just be physically intimate with you, and I don't remember how often I said, the frequency would be, I said, I could do anything during the day. I can literally go out and slay the dragons. That's all I need. Just for you to give this to me, and I will be fine. And yeah, she went along with it because she was caretaking a little boy for a long time until she couldn't anymore. And
did that work? Did it make it better?
Maybe temporarily. Maybe it's from coercion. Maybe from temporarily until she, I guess, either got up the gumption or the courage to finally say, you know what, this isn't working. And it was her that actually said we should go to counseling. And of course I resisted that. I don't want to go to counseling because I don't want to talk about any problems. I was good at trying to push those off on other people. Why would I sit down and talk about those issues with somebody else? So it took a long time to agree to do that, went begrudgingly, probably didn't get much out of the first while of doing that. Yeah, so the canary in the coal mine is the intimacy, and then everything becomes difficult, right? Conversations at home start becoming charged about, then seemingly little things like, well, your tone of voice or my tone of voice, and it just, you start talking about one thing and you end up having an argument for 2 hours about all of these other things that have nothing to do with the thing that you started talking about. So that was becoming more and more common and prevalent for me, at least.
So despite your material and career successes, it sounds like you wouldn't describe your quality of life as being all that wonderful.
Absolutely. Which is the greatest irony because, our world looks outside in. And I'm sure people were looking at me and at us thinking, what do they have to worry about? He's a doctor. They've got 4 kids. They're blah, blah, blah. And he's doing this in the community. And I had, a couple positions within the church organization that we were going to. From the outside looking in, doesn't look like Brian has anything going wrong with him, right? And I think that's part of the challenge in today's day is men, we have become very accustomed to letting other people think that about us. Because the moment we stop and say, you know what, I'm not okay, then you open yourself up to other people thinking that you're not and shaming you for it. You're not okay? Well, there must be something wrong with you if you're not okay and if you have problems at home. So I think at least where I'm at, I know that was a big driver of me. I guess I call it my dysfunction for a long time, is holding it in.
It sounds like that may have been kind of isolating at times. Or maybe that put you in a place where you feared the isolation of being yourself, just being real.
Well, I think I craved it. After a number of years of this going on, I started to get a sense of, okay, well, maybe, is something wrong here? I still wasn't convinced that I was the problem. And I don't think in a marriage and when things go south that there is one person that is the problem. I don't want to label it as that, but I certainly felt like I was not the majority of the problem. And of course, spent nights on my phone in bed, Googling how to fix my wife, blah, 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 how to fix this, how to resurrect intimacy, all this stuff. So yeah, it was very isolating because I didn't know where to go. And I felt horrible inside. I was going to work every day. I was building a practice and helping a lot of people, but internally, I just didn't feel great. I didn't feel like I was in a really good spot of giving from, it's almost like I had my priorities back around. Like I still expected other people, like, why would you not want to come to this practice? Don't you know where I've trained? Don't you know who works here? Don't you know the kind of work we do? Why would you not want to? I mean, that's got to be incredibly icky to someone who comes in the door and is going to share their problems with you and ask for help. So, to answer your question, you talked about, well, what were some of the other warning signs? I would say a blessing to have some patient interactions go south. And they went south because this one, me, I didn't have my insides right. And I was harsh. I was judgmental. I was uncaring, unsympathetic, and unable really to love people, patients in these situations. So after having had a couple of these happen, and the marriage difficulties occur, I think I started looking back around 2019, 2020 for something that would help me.
Yeah, so that's a great segue to ask, what did you try? Like, in getting started with kind of looking at trying to address this sense of dysfunction and, you mentioned some Google searches. Did you try anything else? Maybe any, books? You don't have to mention specifics, but you're welcome to. You mentioned therapy. I'd love to just hear a little bit more about kind of your path to finding a way through this, what you tried first.
Well, as I mentioned before, we went through a lot of therapy together. I don't know how many different therapists we had, but I'm telling you, it was probably 5 years worth. Each one of these therapists, I probably misspoke when I said I don't think any of it worked. I think there was a time and a place for what we experienced with these therapists, but it ultimately didn't have the effect on me personally. It wasn't the approach that I needed because I needed help with me. I began to see like, man, we've done all this counseling. I've read all these articles online. I still want to fix my life, but I didn't know where to go. And so I started doing these searches, and all of a sudden, something came up on Facebook, and it was for a men's group. I won't mention the name here on this podcast, but I thought, what the heck? It was a paid subscription. I joined for a monthly fee, and I got involved. And I met some people there that are my friends still today, but there were some things that I learned there, but it wasn't the right approach for me. It was more of a learn how to be the alpha male in your house and learn how to, I don't know what right words to use here.
You can use whatever.
Do you know what I'm trying to say?
I do. And I think you should unpack this a little bit. Tell our listener the kind of things you're hearing and, to a degree that you're self-aware about those things. What didn't sit well with you? What didn't work for you? What was your experience in putting some of those things to the real life test in a multi-decades marriage?
So, for example, I would say one of the things that they had somewhat right was, be and act confident. Whatever it is that you have to do, go lift weights, get more attractive for your wife so that she'll want to have sex with you. She'll just practically won't be able to control herself because you look like a Greek god, right? I mean, that clearly was one of the approaches is you just need to work out. No, I know there's other reasons for working out because of the good thing that it does for your headspace and the discipline. Those are all good things. But to carry it to the degree that make yourself look a certain way so that she can't help but be physically attracted to you. I tried that. I've always kept myself physically fit, but that backfired. It made things a lot worse, actually.
It's a very male way to look at it. It's very common in men's work. You know that I'm also very fitness oriented, but because men are very physically, our attraction is very physically based, men have this assumption that women are highly, dependent on physical appearance. And while physical appearance is a factor for female attraction, emotional attraction is far more deeply. And so
Far more.
A lot of places never emphasize that. They just say, go get more fit. And then you get more fit and more emotionally feeble at the same time and can't figure out why she doesn't want to be with you.
Again, I think because the priorities, it's the outside versus in approach, right? I don't think there's nothing wrong with being physically fit. I value and I prioritize that. But if it comes at the expense of the inner work, then there will be an imbalance there. And a good female will sift that out in a nanosecond. And my wife was able to do that. So the other aspects, and we don't need to, dive completely into it, but just, be a leader, have a plan, which I don't disagree with, but there's a difference between leading with good masculine energy and strength and almost forcing that upon the people around you and not giving them a say in the matter. Like, this is what we're going to do. And look, I think leading's valuable, but I think it can backfire you if you don't lead with a servant leadership mentality, which all good leaders have.
Well, let's talk about that. How would you define leading today? And how did you define it then? Or how did you find you were encouraged to define it?
Well, I would say back then it would have been, decide what you want to do and make your wishes known. And basically just tell everybody, this is what we're going to do. Look, I think that can work. You can force that to a degree. But, a good woman who has her own mind, who has her own ideas, she's going to want to collaborate with you. She doesn't want to be told what to do. Just because you have a good idea doesn't mean it's the only idea. And I don't think that's good leadership. But it was almost the direction that I thought that first group I was engaging in was kind of taking me down, and it was backfiring horribly. Instead of leading from a place of humility, look, I've got all sorts of good ideas, but I can bring them up and lead in a way that can be inviting. Say, look, here's what we can do tonight, or I have an idea about this vacation. We could do X, Y, and Z. What is your opinion about that? You got any other ideas? Should we change it? What is it? I find that kind of collaborative leadership and communication with my wife to be incredibly bonding. It's very emotionally bonding to lead in that way.
Yeah, I hear you mentioning cooperation, which I don't know that an immature masculine can understand the difference. So there's a fear of not being seen as strong, and a lot of times there's a misunderstanding that to be strong is to be in control, or that leadership means being in control.
Bingo.
Where I would say leadership is really about going first, especially in the hard things, and being responsible, like not showing up to an interaction with our spouse with no plan, saying, did you make a plan, sweetheart, right? Which is what we oftentimes do. We'll get more into that in a little bit here. So it sounds like you spent a lot of time white-knuckling it through a couple different things.
Yeah.
You tried, sounds like some books, internet groups, kind of thing. And despite all of that, where did you feel the most stuck and like change wasn't possible? Where were you getting exasperated from all this?
Say, still perseverating on the fact that something or someone outside of me had to change for me to feel different about myself. Okay. Number one.
For all of our listeners that are not Mayo Clinic educated, tell us what perseverating means.
Oh, sorry. I would say just constantly thinking about it. Yeah, just constantly dwelling on, my life won't get better. It's not going to get better until this thing outside of me, my wife, my job, blah, 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 whatever it is, changes, gets better. I'm not going to feel better. I'm not going to feel the best about myself and operate from wholeness or whatever. I don't know what, I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew things were in turmoil and I felt like it was all outside of me, and constantly worrying and putting that blame and judgment and resentment on things outside of me really, really caused great turmoil within me. Here I was successful as to the world standards, but I did not feel successful internally.
So how long would you say you were stuck like that? Like, was this a protracted period of time? Okay. Years
circling this, right? I would say the better part of probably 8-9 years, not all of it at the same stage, right? But really just kind of swirling this like this eddy, can't get out of the eddy, right? No matter what you do, no matter how hard you paddle in that raft, that eddy's current is just taking you around, and here we are, Big Ben again, all around, over and over again. So a long time.
So what brought all that to a breaking point? Did you hit any kind of rock bottom, or did you just have some sort of painful realization? What started to be a turning point for you in this?
Well, my wife was very honest with me. Now, look, we'd had a lot of very difficult, challenging conversations over the years. And she was very honest with me about what I was doing, the approach of this first internet group that I had joined. It wasn't working. In fact, it was backfiring. And she was frankly honest. She said, Brian, this isn't helping me. I don't know what you're getting out of it, but it is not helping me or our relationship. And she flat out told me.
Did she say it nicely and in a sweet tone?
No. But I wouldn't expect her to do that. So
tell us how she said it. Like, what did it look like?
What did it look like with vitriol? Like, I don't know what. Think of any difficult conversation you've had with your wife, and it's not punctuated with rose petals, right?
There's a reason I'm asking, and that's because, I talk to hundreds of men a year, and most of them are surprised to learn that every man's wife is generally similar to his, and he's experiencing what feels like some really heavy stuff from her. He expected to marry Laura Ingalls Wilder, and he's quite amazed that he's got a woman that is like a honey badger at times, right?
Yeah, he married Joan of Arc is what he did.
Yeah. And when she's, the number one way I described my marriage when I got, in the same spot was adversarial. And I find a lot of men feel this way, but they're also completely unaware that this is a common thing. So that's why I wanted to kind of draw that out a little bit, that you weren't sitting around having polite tea and cookies conversations about this.
No, these conversations would oftentimes extend into the wee hours of the morning, right? Because being the master avoider that I was, I'm still working on that. I've not perfected that, and I'm okay with that. I'm a work in progress. Of course, avoid it at all costs. And then when we're finally in bed together at night, trying to go to sleep at 10:30, 11 o'clock, then she wants to bring up something difficult. And of course, I hated that time of night because I was tired, and she knew I had to get up early to get going for the day. But she wanted emotional connection. She couldn't leave the room untidy, so to speak. This thing she needed to get it off her chest. The difficulty that I had for many, many years was feeling like she was against me. Like the adversarial conversation was, I don't like you. When that's not what she was saying at all. And she'd be the first to say, Brian, that's never been my intent. I love you. I want this to get better. But this thing about you, this drives me bat, crazy. But I took it as because my insides weren't right? I didn't know. I wasn't sure of my own value, worth, and significance, that when something like that came to me from the outside in, I just fell to pieces. I couldn't sit in it. I couldn't sit in it with her. I couldn't have compassion for what she felt. I couldn't have empathy. And of course, I just pushed her away and feel like she was more and more isolated and crazy when she wasn't.
Okay, so wait a minute. So you're telling me an Eagle Scout, military medic, multiple deployments to war zones, Mayo Clinic trained physician, anesthesiologist, pain medic. Do I hear you saying that you felt emotionally feeble?
Absolutely. And I find all of that ironic. I mean, when you put it that way, it's like, how can that be? How can it be? And I don't think I'm going to go out on a limb here. I don't need to go out on a limb because I've talked to a lot of other men now that were in this group together. They feel the same way. Look, they could be very accomplished. All of them are, but we're emotionally feeble. That's a really good way of describing it. Like just wilted at anything that I couldn't have a connected conversation with my wife without feeling like I was being attacked. And that drove her crazy. Like, Brian, I can't talk to you. I can't say anything to you because you're like a little kid. She would say that. I mean, she didn't want to say it to hurt me, but it's like a little child. That child pushes back on you and cries and gets upset because you're hurting their feelings. She didn't want her husband to do that, but that's what I did and made her feel bad because of it.
So you sounds like you were not at a place where criticism was very easy to hear, at least not from her, where defensiveness was probably kind of your MO.
Defensiveness was king. Yeah, I learned how to do that very well.
Yeah. Problem is we're good at it. And the more overachiever you are, it seems like the better you are at defensiveness.
Yeah. And to me, it's taken a long time to unpack that look, each of us is going to go through our own lives and work through professions and have experiences. And we're going to have things that help us further our lives. I am convinced that this topic that we're talking about of men emotionally maturing into really good grounded masculinity is not going to come from the general society. Look, I tried to find it and I couldn't. I was lucky enough that a guy in the first group that I joined told me that he was leaving, and he was leaving for the same reasons I wasn't feeling good about staying after 18 months. And I said, well, Bruce, tell me, where are you going? What are you going to do? He's like, well, I found this other group and I'm going to give them a shot. I sat on that for a while until I had enough courage to call Steve Horseman. Steve Horseman changed my life. I didn't know it because I thought he was speaking Russian to me. But I'll forever be grateful for Steve Horseman giving me the time that he gave me the summer of 2021. That man, 3 or 4 90-minute conversations, didn't charge me a dime. But he was so understanding, so compassionate, so like a big brother to me. And he's the one that helped me see that I could change, and that it wasn't really an outside problem, that I was okay. I just didn't know I was okay. And once I fixed that all of this would get better. I didn't believe him. I mean, I kept listening to him and joined his group, learned a lot there, met some other people that I'm still friends with in that group, and you were one of them. So thank goodness for men who've come into my life that have challenged me like that. You, him, and other people that I've met that haven't just said, you know what, Brian, you're going to figure it out. You're accomplished. You're okay. You're successful. Guys like you always figure it out. No, I wasn't figuring it out. And my life was falling apart before my eyes.
Yeah, isn't that what's frustrating when you're in that spot? Because you're generally, the men I'm usually engaging with, men like you, kind of a key problem is that they're used to being able to figure everything out. I mean, everything in your life depends on you figuring it out. And what's driving men like us mad in those moments is that we're exceptional problem solvers in literally every area of life except our romantic relationship. And despite a lot of effort, a lot of investment sometimes. So yeah, you kind of naturally alluded to this, but I wonder if we can kind of unpack it a little bit more, which was, what were some primary realizations you were coming to in that time where you met Steve and, came into his group at the time and where you and I met? What was like the first realizations? What were the first realizations? Or it could be a belief or a mindset or an awareness where you finally started to see something for what it was, in how you'd been living or how you'd not been living.
I would say one of the earliest ones that still sounded like Russian to me, but I was curious about it, was that I was okay. Was that I was literally okay. That I had everything that I needed to be whole, secure, peaceful, calm, confident, loving. I didn't need to learn a gimmick. I didn't need to learn how to win an argument. And trust me, I asked that. I actually asked one of my therapists, just tell me what to say when she says this. And then when she returns with this comment, what do I then say to be able to come back with another comment? I was actually one of my strategies, and my wife knows that. No, I didn't need to do any of that. I had to figure out what people were saying around me, and then Steve's group, and then with you was, you're already whole. You're already complete. You already have everything inside of you. And I I thought, well, could that really be true? And if that
Doesn't
is
feel like
true,
it, does
it
it?
doesn't. It didn't in the beginning. It sounded like just weird. Like, no, I was used to everything on the outside, right? The accomplishments, all of this thing. And that was not that it started out as the intention, but it sort of became that. Like, it built up this life around me of this around me is who I am, not this guy on the inside is who I really am. So that was a huge change, a mindset shift change for me when I started to realize maybe that is the key for me. And maybe it's not something outside of me. Maybe it's been the guy in the mirror. The second thing, this is a concept that you brought up, and that was that your wife is not your enemy. She's not your adversary, but she is holding up a very crystal clear mirror in front of you. And boy, I did not want to hear that.
It's sobering truth, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, I did not want to hear that, because that's a 2x4 to the head when you let that sink in. That's like, oh, well, yeah, well, am I really the root cause of all this? And can I fix it?
Just to add some clarity for someone listening who's not familiar with my work or our community, a woman's behavior is not the mirror. It's your experience of her behavior, right?
I would agree.
And so this is something that people get confused about, because they might see a woman yelling or experiencing a strong emotion, or maybe even being quite toxic. And I'm not suggesting that if a woman is toxic, it's your fault. That's how guys think. They interpret what you're saying as being that, and it's not. It's a matter of there's 8 billion people on planet Earth. And if they're being toxic toward me, I'm having an experience within myself about that. And that experience is the mirror, right? So like, if you're yelling and screaming at me right now, I could have all manner of reactions. But the reaction to you screaming and being toxic is not coming. It's coming from me. My insides and my interpretations. I'm bringing all of my life to bear in how I interpret my wife in front of me. And that's the role of a mirror. I like to use an example for people who are maybe struggling with this idea. I think it's good to just kind of unpack this a little bit. You know, because we've shared a lot of burgers together, that I love burgers. And if I went out to a burger restaurant, and I like my burgers medium rare, and I sat down and I ordered a medium rare burger with a vegan, like a dyed-in-the-wool vegan, when that burger is set before me, I'm going to have a very different experience of that object in front of me than the person I'm at dinner with, because the experience of the burger is coming from our inside interpretations, meaning, what we think about things. Because I love burgers, I'm going to be excited. My mouth's going to water. I'm going to be thinking about, I can't wait to tear into this piece of flesh. A vegan is going to be experiencing that with a whole different story. And the burger did not create my story or the vegan story. It simply became an opportunity to experience our inner dialogue. And so what you're saying to the person listening here is, the way you experience your wife is not coming from your wife. It's coming from you. And what you're saying is that was a huge shift. So tell us more about what made that such a big shift for you.
Because I was very used to judging what I saw outside of me as good or bad. Good or bad. Instead of, and then, so there might be a behavior that I see from someone, whether it's my wife or kids or anybody in my circle of influence. I would then label the person as good or bad or whatever based on what I saw them do, right? So having marital conflict, there's charged conversations, there's emotional conversations, there's really difficult feelings that you're going through and you don't know how to process it. Being an emotionally immature man, back then, I would label and judge my wife as the problem.
Based on your experiences. So
based on my experience, until learning some of these concepts of, no, I'm having my own experience with the thing that's going on outside of me. And I'm interpreting what I'm experiencing based on where I'm at on my insides. Giving somebody the benefit of the doubt or giving them true unconditional high regard and being able to absolutely love that individual. Because learning to do that versus learning to place a value on what they do or what they say has made a big difference for me. I don't approve of all behavior that's going on. I know you don't either, but I can let that go and I can say, you know what? The behavior is not who that person really is. What they're saying is not really who they are. It took going through this men's work to understand my own theology. My own theology teaches that, but I didn't get it at that level, that unconditional love and acceptance and regard is offered from God, the creator, whoever, whatever you want to call it, him, to us, regardless of what we do.
There's a tremendous fear that most people have when we talk about this concept of unconditional high regard, that you're going to be treated like a doormat. In fact, it's the number one way people respond. And I specifically remember when you and I had these first conversations, you saying, Sven, are you basically teaching me how to eat a shit sandwich and enjoy it? And I remember laughing at that, and I still laugh about it. That.
I did use those exact words as well. We don't need to sugarcoat it. Exact
words. Super fair, because this is how it feels. There's this tremendous fear that it is defensiveness that keeps the world relating to us a certain way. It's kind of an interesting thing. So one way that I like to describe this, because it's just a lot more useful for me, is that it's all ultimately about ending emotional reactivity and deciding to treat other people not based on how they deserve moment by moment, but who I love to be. And this is what makes it really powerful. I stop giving away my behavior to reactions. And I start to just wake up every day and say, who do I love to be moment by moment? I love to be a generous man, a kind man, warm, compassionate. I'm not going to move off of that because you're being an asshole right now. See? And so this is where it's powerful, is that you stop giving away your personal power for who you love to be to reactivity. And it's ironic that people believe you're going to be a pushover or you're going to be a doormat. You are never more of a doormat than when you are an emotionally reactive man, because you have no power and no agency over the very fundamentals of how you show up in the moment. And so when that switched for me, same thing. But I want to unpack that a little bit, because it sounds like a foreign language to people at first. And they think maybe that you've got to be religious or you have to have a certain religious mindset. But this is really just sourcing your why in you instead of the person. It's that simple.
I would agree with that. The Russian language part of this, if we want to call it that, because I can't remember the name of the book that actually talks about reacting versus responding. Famous author, blanking on it right now. It doesn't matter. I read it early on, and I was trying to just, okay, Brian, just respond. Don't react, just respond. But that's like telling a 3-year-old, just ride the bike. They don't know how to ride the bike, right? They see this thing with 2 wheels. Well, just get on and start pedaling. So I was trying to tell myself, reading all of this material, do this, do that. Again, looking for that gimmick, right? Where's the gimmick? Tell me what to do or to say or how to be, and I'll just do that, and all of this gets better. It wasn't until I got back to my insights that my value, worth, and significance, and the love that I give, not that I get, but that I give. Once I switched that, my life began to turn around, and not just at home. I mean, here at work. I'm in my office right now, but so this practice that I'm in Monday through Friday, my interactions with the people that I work with and my patients, that has now changed from a outside in to a, I'm here and I want to help you. How can I best help? And just give and give and give.
So you mentioned this, and I'm wondering if you can unpack this a little bit more. You mentioned kind of a first step was that you noticed people were talking about being responsive and proactive instead of reactive. But what I think I heard you say was a frustration that you heard people just say, like, well, just stop doing this and start doing that. Right. But it doesn't sound like you knew how to do it. So what were the first steps? Like, how did you start connecting some of those dots to fill in the I guess you could call it the liminal space between the old way and this new way that you were kind of dabbling in and getting familiar with? How did you start to make those connections? What were the aha perspectives or shifts or moments?
I'm going to talk a little spiritual.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to use my faith to explain this. Okay.
Be yourself. Yeah. This is all about.
I'm going to be authentic because this is who I am, right? I have grown up in a faith that actually teaches that what we see here is a two-part. We have this physical and we have the soul on the inside. I've always believed that. I felt that it was true. I had my own witness that I think it's true, that I know that it's true. But the problem that I had was I couldn't connect that the soul on the inside is really the most perfect thing that God has ever created on this earth. This thing that houses my soul, it's very imperfect. It gets sick, bones break, things happen. But the soul inside of me is perfect, and it doesn't lack or want for anything. So here my theology has taught me that in my entire life. I've gone on my own proselyting mission and taught that to other people in South America. But getting involved in this work, men's work, to really connect those dots that, no, wait a minute. The soul that each of us has, if it's really perfect and whole, then I don't need anything. I don't need somebody to approve of me. I don't need somebody to come home and give me an attaboy. I don't need to go home and have everybody shower me with love and affection because I went to work for 10 hours like every other man does, right? But that what I had inside of me, who is really me, my soul, the thing that's eternal, was perfect and was capable of loving unconditionally. I just needed to tap into that better and get out of what I was thinking about and the gimmicks I was learning and just get back to that. That was a big aha moment for me. It helped me that I had grown up in a faith-based society, culture and going to church. But I've talked to a lot of guys who aren't religious, who think of it the same way. The concept of the heart, of who you really are, coming back to your center, I think resonates with a lot of people. And you don't need to learn something outside of you to succeed.
Yeah. And it's interesting, and maybe you could unpack this for our listeners, since, people won't necessarily know the context of our community and whatnot. But since we come from a community that has people of all background, non-religious and religious, maybe you could unpack the irony of exploring some of these things in a space that was not a purpose-built religious or faith-based space. Yeah. And men's work, tell us a little bit more about how you started to connecting, those dots in that kind of a space. Like what was different about men's work and being involved with, that particular context that allowed you to start connecting to some things that you'd known, it sounds like, for, many years.
Yeah. I would say that's a really good question. There's some friends that I have in the group that aren't overly religious, but have turned their lives around, as I'm attempting to do and in the process of doing. The lack of religion in their life was not an inhibitor for them, because I've told you many times, the reason why I keep doing this with the community, with the coursework, with everything that we talk about, is because it rings true to me. It rings true. And it's not a religious concept. It happens to align with my faith. But this idea of separating your value, worth, and significance from your externals, look, how can it be? I've taken my family to the Dominican Republic. I did that about 8 or 9 years ago for a humanitarian service project. We witnessed massive extreme poverty. My kids got to witness firsthand what those literally poor people were living like. Do you know what they told me? They said, Dad, but they seem happy. They're happy. They don't have a bed like I do at home. They don't have the clothes I do. They don't have this or that, but they seemed really happy. And I think it's because they have been forced to be in an environment where they've had to separate. the externals from their insides, and they're happy despite it. I think being involved in a men's group and having other perspective of people who live outside this country, who are involved in all sorts of other professions and jobs, and having people chime in and give their perspective from their own angles, not necessarily come from a religious or non-religious, but our happiness, my happiness, I think this is another aha moment for me. It comes from within me. I don't become happy because of my outsides. Don't become happy because of interaction with my wife or with you, for that matter. I love you to pieces, but I'm not my happiness, what I give, it can't be dependent on who I interact with. This practice could be gone next week. The building could burn down. I don't know. Maybe I get in an accident and I can't practice anymore. Learning that switch and being able to make that switch, big difference.
If I could summarize that, what I hear you saying is kind of a fundamental thing you've described in our time today is moving from a way of engaging the world where your value, worth, and significance was sourced outside of yourself, specifically in accomplishment, performance, validation from others like your wife, your community, and just switching to an internally sourced view of the same things, value, worth, and significance. And if I've heard you correctly, a big upside to that, really the big upside is it's not at all feeble. If your value and worth and significance are coming from within you, then all kinds of things can happen on your outsides and your sense of well-being maintains itself, right? Do I hear you saying that correctly?
Yes. And I'll give you a concrete example. I can go home. Look, life happens. It doesn't matter that I've been in this group for 3 years. It doesn't prove me of things that happen in life. Things will happen. I'll make mistakes. Somebody else makes mistakes. People have a bad day. I walk into a situation where it's charged. Maybe I've done something wrong. Maybe I've done something to upset my wife. She has a very valid point of coming to me and explaining why she's hurt. Because I don't view her as someone who needs to give me what I can give myself. I can have compassion for her. I can accept the fact that, look, it's happening right now, Brian. The other shoe didn't drop. This is just happening. And it may not happen again. It may happen tomorrow. But because it's happening doesn't mean you're wrong or you're devalued or you're not worth it or you've done something egregiously wrong to upset the universe.
Yeah.
You just have a person in front of you who's hurting. Can you accept that? Can I take that on and internalize that and just have compassion and try and see their point of view?
So
that has been life-changing for me.
Yeah, I want to talk more about this in a minute because I think this is going to be really worth listening to. This whole thing is hearing, how things have changed in your relationship with your wife and others, work and whatnot. Tell us, since you've mentioned a community a number of times, and a lot of men listening to this and women, they won't know what you're talking about. Maybe if you could unpack a little bit about what role community played, coaching, mentorship, all of this, and not to give a commercial for these places and things, but I want you to talk more about, substance-wise. Was there a specific value in having any of these things, coaching, mentoring, community? And if so, what did it uniquely add to your experience of kind of going from through this shift from having an externalized sense of well-being to an internalized sense of well-being? And I realize that's a loaded question, right?
Yeah.
But if you could help our listener understand if that was important and so what way?
Well, I'm going to share something incredibly raw with you. I think I've told you this before. I know I have. I'd been in Steve's group for about 6 months, and I had obviously began speaking with you and watching some of your videos. Still, I'm going to tell you, they still sounded like Russian, but they don't now, but they did back then. Just the concepts didn't land on me. I don't know what the right way to say that is, but anyway,
I understand.
Needed to progress. Yeah. So I decided to have a phone call with you, and it was December the 23rd of 2021.
Wow, you remember the date?
Oh, I remember like it was yesterday. I didn't tell my wife I was doing it, and I came home late from work, December 23rd, without telling her what I was doing. She was obviously upset, had right to be upset. She didn't know where it was, and she was looking forward to me coming home and being with the family to start the Christmas season. The next morning, December 24th, we've got the day planned out, all of these fun things. My dear wife looked me in the eyes and said, Brian, I think I know why you're doing this. This has probably hurt me more than anything I could have ever done to my wife intentionally. And it was this. She said, I think your motivation for doing this new group that you've now found, this is now the third one because it was the initial one, then Steve, then yours. You're going to figure yourself out, and then you're going to leave me with 4 kids. That was a hard one.
Tell us a little bit more about how did that strike you that day? Like, explain the stirring that happened from that.
I think what I saw in its most raw, unadulterated form, raw as can be, was a scared little girl whose hopes and dreams were tied up in a marriage with this guy, with 4 kids, with a life, with a community, and that she saw that slipping away. And why would she not see it slipping away? Because the patterns of the previous years leading up to that certainly would tell you that it was slipping away, right? And now he's going to go, quote, find the light, and then just leave this person behind. That broke my heart, and I had the presence to look her in the eye and say, I don't know where this came. Well, I do know where it came from. It came from right here. I couldn't have fought this up. I looked at her and I said, held her by the hands. I said, I need to fix the guy in the mirror. There's some things about me that I need to fix. You know that? I know it. And when I get to that point, I want you to be able to live with that, to live with me, live in it, live around it, experience it. I hope it's enjoyable. And then I want you to make the decision, whether you're staying or going. That's what I want. I'm pretty sure I don't think she said anything after that. Sure, she was probably, I'm not sure I believe that, but it was a tender moment between the two of us where I really realized after that conversation with you that the value in having connection to other men that could help me learn and grow through this process. Look, I needed content. It wasn't just enough for me to say, my value is all within inside myself. No, I needed content. I needed to go through a process where I had a community of men. We have gotten away from that in our society. Real men who are open with each other, who share their frustrations, who share their worries and get advice and help and courses to take. I've taken numerous courses and one-on-one coaching. I decided, look, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to make a financial commitment, but I'm going to go above and beyond. I'm going to do the individual one-on-one coaching. I knew it wasn't going to be enough. I started out thinking, I'll just do these courses to gather what I need to gather and then go on my merry way. And then I realized, wait a minute, there's some napalm for this process. And that is having personal one-on-one coaching on a regular basis to go over these concepts and to have them ruminate and talk about them and then bring them up and then let them rest and then bring them up. That has been crazy effective for me.
Can you, for the person listening who's maybe never heard of this whole concept before, men's work, community, coaching, all that, can you just unpack that a little bit into like nuts and bolts? Like, what kind of time did you spend? How often did you spend it? Like, how did this really impact your lifestyle, your day to day, all this stuff you're talking about? Because it'll sound like Russian to some people.
Yeah, it will. If you get to the point where I got to, I knew that if things didn't change, that I would end up divorced. There was just no way around it. I mean, the closeness that we once cherished and had was fading fast. And if things didn't change, so I approached this last ditch effort, if you want to call it that, with 2 feet in. I said, look, I'm not going to dabble in this. If something is going to change, I'm going to get it here, and I need to jump in with 2 feet. And so I decided this is going to be a daily thing for me. I joined the group. We have our own internal app that we use to communicate with each other. The courses that we access were within that app. And it was a daily thing, reading material, actually reading good material that helps you learn. And then using the group and group calls, one-on-one calls, help solidify the concepts and to bounce them off. And then when you fail, you bring it to the men, and the men can tell you and be your sounding board. So it became a daily thing for me.
Do you feel like, this is a little bit of a leading question, do you feel like that helped you learn almost like as a gym would learn, help you to grow in a fitness? Do you think a men's community helped you to grow your authenticity and vulnerability muscles a little bit?
Absolutely, it did. So, and I'm still benefiting from that because I think men in general, we have this external shell. We hide behind it. We don't let other people in, and we certainly don't do a lot of out. But being in a men's group, yeah, the walls become thinner and thinner and thinner. And I'm telling you, some of the men in this group have become some of my best friends. And one in particular that I just, I've watched him change. I met him at your house a couple of years ago. And every time we go to a retreat together or interact, we lift each other up. It's not like we've got to a point where everything is bliss, like we don't make any mistakes or we fall off the wagon and we stop our daily habits, but we're there to support each other. And there's no way that I go through this process without a men's group. There's no way. I could not just go take this course at home, try and internalize it. Don't bounce it off anybody. If you have questions, I guess Google it or whatever. No.
Why is that? What do you think it is about a group dynamic that you're so keen on it? Break that open a little bit. What does a men's group give you that you won't have just by taking a course on your own or reading?
Because there's accountability. There's accountability, and men can hold each other accountable. As you know, the male to female, the man to woman dynamic, that doesn't work so well. Holding your woman accountable, so to speak, that's a disaster. You can still lead, and I'm not saying you abdicate or give away your leadership, but men hold each other accountable. And if you come to the group saying, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I did, and you can have other men just dissect that and say, that sounds pretty, I'll use the okay language that, that sounds pretty screwed up, or this is where this probably went south for you. So having other men hold you accountable is huge. You're not going to hold yourself accountable. If I could have done that, I would have, and I wouldn't have been in this situation.
Has that been hard for you? Because I know a lot of men I meet, and I would have put myself in this bucket a number of years ago. I think I was scared of accountability to a degree from other men because most of what I'd experienced that was called accountability was oftentimes, it left a lot to be desired at a lot of levels emotionally.
I think when the accountability piece is done without compassion, without real regard, unconditional high regard, then it's gonna feel like eating a lemon. Like I'm just forced to eat this because I'm supposed to. I don't know what I'm supposed to get out of it. It certainly doesn't taste any good. And you're done with it thinking, well, that didn't do me a whole lot, right? I feel just as bad. Now my teeth hurt because I did that, right? Yeah. But with a men's group, but when you have a community to be a part of, this is what our society has gotten away from. This is not a new thing. I mean, good civilizations have had men that associate with men. Why is it over the last 5 decades that's disappeared? And I'll dare to say, I think many of the ills in our society could be solved if more of this happened. We need more men getting together with men, holding themselves accountable, teaching each other, being a mentor. Look, I'm not learning any of this stuff unless another guy like you or Steve Horseman or other people in the group teach me this, because you care about me. And my life has changed because of it, not because there's some sort of secondary gain because you have an ego the size of Mount Rushmore. You don't. And other men don't either. But when men build each other up and hold each other accountable, that's really juicy and effective. Men get better when that happens. And as a result, I've wanted to do that. I've reached out to other people in my own community because it's a natural inclination. You start to notice other people around you to think, I wonder if they're struggling. I wonder if that look on their face could be this. I don't know. I would have ignored it years ago, but now I don't.
Do you think you could have even see it? I mean, the nature of when you're in your own deep emotional pain is it's very hard to notice what your neighbors are experiencing if you're kind of preoccupied with your own dysfunction.
I agree with you. And it leads me to something else that I think I've grown into is when I first started, I held an intense amount of shame about where I was at and why I was where I was at. And why couldn't I have just learned this 10 years ago? Wouldn't it have been easier? Wouldn't I have saved my wife a fair ton of grief with me and lived a better life if I had just figured it out? But really, was I in the heart space, the emotional place to be able to get it? In fact, who knows? Maybe it did come across my lap 10 years ago and I just ignored it because I did think it applied to me and had to go through what I'd gone through to get me to a spot where I can say, I'm ready. I'm going to jump in. I think a lot of men might feel that way, like embarrassed or ashamed or thinking that they could do it on their own. Look, you're right where you're supposed to be. You're right where you're supposed to be. And your life has happened and unfolded this way for a darn good reason.
Yeah, one of the things we have to spend a significant amount of time helping new men work through is all of the judgment they have about those kind of time frames, right? Our brains start telling us a story about I should have this, I should have that. And you can't move forward while simultaneously judging your present and your past. And so it's kind of a necessary part of our growth of coming to a place where we accept the timeline as it has unfolded because it's not changeable, right? So there's really not much value in second guessing what already happened. But it's a hard phase to work through. Coming to that place where you just accept that everything that has happened, what if it's just necessary? What if it's just been necessary? Then you can move forward in a meaningful way.
And how about to take it a step further? You and I have talked about this a number of times. What if the Creator, God, had it in his design all along for it to be this way? What if it's not just a simple wake up one morning and have it all figured out? What if you have to go through some boiling in the pot of water for some years before you actually have an experience where you can start to change? I believe that that's very true. And I've been able to finally accept that. I started this work thinking, I'm doing it so that I can give other people regard. So I can respond and not react so that I can. So here's the golden nugget for me is that I'm able to start giving myself grace. I'm human. I've made some mistakes and I can go back because I can hold my wife's hand and open that door to a room that's filled with trash. Emotional trash, garbage, hurt feelings, things that I did that I'm not proud of. Never infidelity, not anything like that. But the emotional hurt that a man can inflict on a woman is pretty deep. To be able to open that door and not just look at it, but maybe even walk in the room. I'm probably more emotional about that than anything in my life because that is healing for my wife. To be able to not just leave the door closed and walk by it and kind of wink at each other, think, oh, we're not walking in there. How about when she opens the door and says, will you walk in there with me? That you walk through that door and you look at all that stuff as she tells you, do you remember when this happened? Yep. I felt like this. And I could say to her, I can imagine that would be difficult. And I can hold her, I can empathize. That is manly as crap. That is real masculinity to me, to be able to have that kind of presence, calmness, responsiveness, love in your heart, that you could do that for another person. That's true masculinity for me.
Earlier you described, we even pointed it out, you described a certain amount of feebleness emotionally. And you just described a complete shift from emotional feebleness to emotional confidence. Is that what your life is like now? Do you feel like you're pretty willing and able to go into those rooms? And just for the listener who's unfamiliar, you're referring to rooms in a metaphor we use for describing a relationship like a mansion. That's from my book, The Resilient Husband. And where a woman might, it feels like she's bringing up the past, and this bugs the shit out of guys in a big kind of way.
Yeah, we just want to go forward.
We just want to go forward, and it's because we feel feeble, actually, in reality. And what you're describing now is it sounds like a real openness and confidence to go to those places. Like they don't scare you anymore.
They don't. I'm not going to sit here on, this conversation with you and tell you that I'm 100% perfect and resolved at this. Look, I'm a work in progress, and I'm glad I'm a work in progress. There are times when I notice that I may not be in that place where I can do that. And I know that that's not something to do with outside of me. That's where am I at, right? Am I rested? Am I fed? Am I hydrated? Or am my internals taken care of? And I know that I'm in the best place when that happens. So not going to say that I don't make mistakes. And even though I do this work, am doing this work, that I don't backslide, because I have. But I don't view that anymore as must not all be right. This was a bad idea to do this for the last 3 years. Look, you made that mistake. Look at that argument you had. Well, it must not be serving you, Brian. You might, find something else to do. Or I could just say, happened, accept it, own what part I can own, and work through it.
Yeah, that sounds very resilient. But what I hear you saying is that you can move through times even when you're not meeting your standard in a moment, that you have an easier time recognizing that and moving through it quickly instead of getting spun out or hung up there. And I wonder if you could unpack this a little bit more, because you've kind of dabbled around the edges of this, and I think this is really the biggest part of a transformation that happens, and that is the relationship with yourself. How has that relationship with yourself changed since, I think you said December 23rd, 2021 was it?
Yeah. I would say the biggest change that I've noticed in myself is that I'm no longer living my life on a day-to-day basis looking for the outside of me to make me feel whole and complete. Moving through my day, looking for ways to give, to show compassion, to show regard, to encourage, to educate, to do something useful for another person. That is such a different way of living. Instead of waiting for everything to happen around you and then trying to figure out, should I react or respond? I guess I read this book. It said I should say this. It doesn't work that way, right? You have to spend some time really getting settled with who you are before you can do that. And I'm not perfect at it. I'm certainly not, but I keep engaging in the group with the content because I know that it will sharpen my saw. It will help with that. It takes off the rough edges that just pop up. And I need another guy to help shave that off. Help me see how it could be better. I feel way different now than I did three and a half years ago. Way different. I'm not scared. The future is going to be what it's going to behold. I think that it looks exciting to me, and I'm okay with the future. I believe that everything that's good that happens to people is for a reason. I think everything that comes your way that's not, that you view as bad, that whatever life circumstance that is, God can use that to your betterment, to your improvement, if you'll let it. Not been an easy process to go through this, to have a mirror point, up in your face all the time. And it's been humbling to learn it, to see it and to figure out, well, that rough edge needs to go. That one needs to go, but worth it. Very worth it.
Yeah. Well, how else would you tell us or a listener how your life has changed relationship wise? What do you have now in your relationship with your wife that you didn't before, with your kids, with your patients? What else has been a fruit from the work you did, which was ultimately to change the relationship with your inside?
Yeah, I would say, be interesting to hear what my wife says about this, because I don't want to put words in her mouth.
Let's go call her.
Yeah, she would have something to say for sure. She's
Next week
opinionated.
on the Masterful Man podcast. I
The
would love to
wife
do that.
of- yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, it would be. Maybe the two of us. No, here's what I think she would say. I think she would say the guy's a little more grounded. He doesn't get off center as much as he used to. He still does from time to time, but he's pretty grounded. He's a little more calm. He's more peaceful when he walks through the door. He's less demanding. Still has an opinion, wants to lead, but he's not forcing it. And I'm a little more able to go talk to him. He's not going to wilt. And this isn't going to turn into a big argument if I bring up something that hurt my feelings. I think that's what she would say.
Do you think she feels loved?
I think she does now.
Do you think she feels like you love yourself?
I think she would say much so, because that is a big fear that men, I know I had it when I started this work. Wait a minute. I'm going to invest some time and resources, money, the thing I work hard for, and my time for myself. That could be viewed as very selfish.
Yeah.
Well, you're just going to go spend all this time, right?
Maybe you can unpack that a little bit, because this is common with husbands. It's twice as common with husbands that are fathers, because we're conditioned to putting ourselves last. And it's triply worse, not to pick at you here a little bit, but men from a religious background historically tend to put themselves at the very bottom. They can feel like making a decision to invest this kind of time and resources into working on themselves. It can feel very selfish to them. And so I'm wondering what you'd say to a man like that, because it sounds like you struggled with some of that.
Yeah, for sure. I think to go along with that, do you actually let the other person know what you're doing? Are you open and authentic? I think that is a part of the process. That
You mean like your spouse?
your spouse. Yeah. I think if you want to hide it from them, if you want to keep everything from them, that's part of the problem, right?
Right. Yeah.
You're not being knowable. You're not being open. You're not being authentic.
None of my clients, I will generally not work with somebody if they continue to want to hide something from their spouse, because of anti-pattern to intimacy.
Yeah. So I think it's very valuable to have that kind of openness and just coming to a realization that, look, if these old patterns were serving you well, you probably wouldn't have ended up where you are right now. Me, first one to raise my hand, right? So what has to change? Well, if I have to change, how does that change happen? You don't get more fit by sitting on the couch eating a bag of Sun Chips every night. I would love to do that with a 2-liter Dr. Pepper. I love those two things, but I can't do that every night. I need to be intentional about how I go about the process, and that will involve time. It will involve some calls. It will involve some coursework. It will involve some resources of hard-earned money.
Yes. Just to ask you very real questions, because these are the kind of tactical questions men have. Because men are terrified of having conversations like this with their wife. So, Has your wife resented any of this time and resources you put in?
I don't think so. Initially she was very skeptical, and why wouldn't she be, right? I had to learn to hold space for that. This is a woman where, I tried a number of things. They all failed. The first Facebook group I joined did us in. So why would she not be skeptical? And you want to spend how much money? You want to go talk to a guy in Pennsylvania? Wait a minute. You're going to fly out there for a long weekend? You just met him 6 months ago. I know, but he called me. He's having a get together. I really feel like I need to go.
I remember when you arrived at my home, little bit of a deer in the headlight look, kind of sharing a little bit about how your wife found it a little alarming that you're traveling across the country to hang out with a guy you met on Facebook. Yeah, I know, it's crazy. And I did the same thing when Steve Horseman invited me to go to Mexico, and I'm thinking, like, is this like a cartel's going to get us or what? Right. But,
right. Well,
yeah,
it sounds fishy. It sounds fishy, right? As I progressed through the work and really my insights got sorted out and came back to my baseline. And I'm not talking about learning gimmicks. I'm talking about getting back to my true default state, which is a very kind, open-hearted, calm, confident, loving man. That's my default. That's everybody's default, actually.
Boom.
Everyone's. Just come back to that. So I tell my own family, my extended family, like, for example, last year when we went overseas on that really big trip with 4 guys, my in-laws, my parents, what are you doing, Brian? How much money are you spending? You're going to go spend a week in Switzerland without your wife? Yep. I'll make it up to her. We already talked about it. Here's why she's not skeptical anymore. And obviously you don't need to go on these, excursions to make this happen. The magic happens when you get involved in the community, you do the coursework and you do one-on-one calls. That's where the work really happens. The retreats and stuff, once or twice a year, that's just help. That's the icing on the cake. Here's why she's not resentful anymore, because she's witnessing the change. I told her, and I meant what I said. I told you I couldn't have thought it up. I said, I want to change and figure some things out and let you live in that, have the blessing of living in that. Well, the fruit has borne. It's borne fruit. So, yeah, I've done all this, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Do you think she still worries about that you've upgraded and that you'll leave her?
No, I don't. I don't feel a need to ask her that. I don't feel a need, because our behavior certainly doesn't say that. And it would be okay if she did. I'm okay with that. If she one day said, I made that comment, it really bothers me. Sometimes it comes back to me and I do have that worry. I'd be okay talking about that. I would not try and push that off into the deep recesses of the house and shut the door. No, let's talk about that. Tell me what worries that about you. Do you legitimately have a fear that that's going to happen? Yes, I do. Why? Well, this and this. Okay. Yeah, that would be very darn scary, actually. You're 50% of this marriage with me, and that's another concept we can get into later. But anyway, yes, I don't think she's worried about it. But if she did bring it up, I'd be perfectly fine talking about it with her. And I think it would be calming for her to do that.
Good. Well, what do you feel now that you had given up hope thinking you'd ever be able to feel before you died? Or that you hadn't felt before in your adult life?
Oh, I love that. I'm going to use a movie, one of my favorite movies. I'm sure people will hear this, probably judge me for it, but one of my favorite movies of all time is with Jack Nicholson and Helen Hunt. It's called As Good as It Gets. Have you seen that movie? There's a part in that movie where Jack, what's the name of the character? I can't remember, but he's freaking out. And he barges into a psychiatrist, and because he can't calm himself down. He needs somebody else to calm him. And his psychiatrist refuses to see him because he's already got patients. And he's in the waiting room, standing there, looking around everybody else sitting on the chairs, waiting to go in. And he says, is this as good as it gets? Meaning, maybe the life that he has right now, is this really where it's at? Maybe he should learn to find meaning in what he's going through right now, instead of trying to change him or change it. Maybe there's meaning in living it right now. And I've never shared this with anybody, not even my family. If you ask them what my favorite movie is, they'll tell you this movie. And I've never told them because I've watched it so many times. That was my biggest fear. But using it as is this all there is?
Mm-hmm.
Do I just go to work every day, bring home a good salary, and this is it? And I just live with difficult emotions because I can't sort them out? Is this as good as it gets? Now my mind just shifted a little bit to, I have a life. I have a great opportunity to use my circumstances to get better and to better everybody around me. And yeah, today, this is as good as it gets, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with it.
That's good. Yeah, and when you know yourself as a creator, you can kind of put that question to rest, because when you believe the world is happening outside of you, you ask the question, is this as good as it gets? Because you're thinking that life is coming from outside of you.
Yeah.
When you have the kind of shift you're talking about, to life happens inside out, not outside in, then the question becomes, is this as good as I want to create? And as long as that question is no, well, you simply create the next thing.
Yeah.
All right.
I
So
like that.
kind of picking up on some of these same threads, if you could go back and talk to an older version of yourself, maybe I would say December 2020, which I think would have probably placed you squarely in a lot of marital upheaval and personal chaos. What would you say? Like, what did you wish? I know we've already talked about kind of letting go of wishing this had happened sooner, but if you had the opportunity to travel back in time, and tell a younger version of you something, a piece of perspective, a piece of encouragement, an aha moment, what do you think you would say?
I would say what Steve Horsman told me. You're okay. You are more than okay. You've always been okay. And this is okay. This thing that's happening to you, this really difficult, emotionally charged circumstance or circumstances, this does not define who you are. This is just life happening around you. But you are okay.
How would you answer the man, though, that says, well, I sure don't feel okay? Like,
I know you don't.
How do you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. I would say, right, I know you don't feel okay, but that's how we make the change. We start to have a different experience with what we're feeling, right? Just because I have the thoughts and I have feelings, we're programmed to think that that's what I'm going to act on, right? Because I'm having these thoughts and feelings for a good reason. They must be real. They must be true in what I need to do. No, maybe it has nothing to do. Maybe it's just your brain making it up. And you are okay, regardless of what you think and feel. And I know you don't feel okay, but you can feel different. You can interact with that feeling differently. And you will.
Yeah. A big aha. I'm privileged to watch and walk with a lot of men through these transformational spaces. And the way I look at this pattern is a man moves from have to feel different before I do different. That's kind of where I meet men. They're in a pattern of I can't do differently until I feel differently. And the big shift that's very hard for men to make, but it's the most powerful shift, is to come to an understanding that I won't feel differently until I do differently. And I like to use the metaphor of imagine that you're in total darkness and cold, saying, well, I can't start a fire until I can see and until I'm warm. But this is how the ego gets caught in this way of thinking that I can't do different things until my feelings change, not realizing that it's the action of starting a fire that produces the warmth and the light that you're needing. And that all boils down to a decision to act. And this is really the difference between an impotent, powerless, feeble man and a strong, confident, powerful man. The only difference is one of them has decided to act and has gotten reacclimated with their decision-making, their power, their choices.
Yeah.
But it is the hardest shift to make because it can feel really foreign to us. We get kind of caught in this matrix-like delusion that the outside has to change. And that is the source of all stuff.
You need to have some sort of maybe grand realization or feeling different about something so that you can be or do differently, right?
Right. Yep. That's how you get stuck.
Yeah. I agree. I agree with that because you'll never get to the doing part because you're waiting for this other thing to happen. And I would say I was probably there for a long time, right?
Yeah. Which is
waiting.
Do you think it's fair to say that that's kind of what made you hyper fixated on your wife, is that you had fallen for this kind of mental trap that until she does something different, you can't feel something different. And until you feel something different, you can't experience or do different things?
Totally true. Totally true. And that, I think, look, women, I'm not going to speak for them, but I think they can sniff that out in a nanosecond. Yeah. They know when the pressure is coming, right? When there's expectation and judgment, At least mine can. So they are such a blessing. I entered this process thinking, I just need a different wife. I just need somebody, a person who thought differently, who acted differently. Thankful I have the same one. I'm so thankful that my wife was patient enough with me and loved me enough to stick with me through this process of me emotionally maturing to the point where I can be where I'm at now. An imperfect man, but I feel like I'm standing on two different feet than I was 3 or 4 years ago. I needed her for that. I didn't need to get away from her to live a different life. I needed her to walk through this with me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's part of the power of choosing your meaning too, is one of the meanings you can choose is to see that whole story differently. Does she feel toxic to you now? Does she feel adversarial?
No.
Disrespectful?
No. And of course, I thought all of those things and more, right? I mean, look, in the throes of difficult times, yeah, all of that went through my mind. But I've come to realize that, we want polarity in our life. We want this attraction with the man and the woman, but we're two different people. We approach things differently. The woman is fluid. She has her ups and downs. She is literally that was one of the concepts that was so foreign to me. A woman is like water and a man is like the riverbank. You need both, right? Mm-hmm. You can't have a river without a riverbank. You can't. It's just wild and it overflows and it's destructive. But a good, solid, grounded man appreciates, at least I do now, that, look, the things that are attractive to me in my wife, the energy, the excitement. Well, guess what? With that comes a lot of the things that typical men's work will say, that's toxic femininity. That's just a woman that needs to be put in her place. No, it's not, actually. That's just a woman being a woman.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of men judge the feminine, unfortunately, as it's broken. And to be fair, a lot of women judge masculinity as, and if you just kind of open your heart and mind, you only know life as a man. So it's no surprise that something outside of your experience looks dysfunctional to you and for her and vice versa. But there's a significant amount of damage that happens in a relationship from judging a woman's femininity as a problem to solve. And one of the key turnarounds a man can get is just letting go of the idea that he's married to a dysfunctional woman and just say, I'm married to a woman. And so we spend the first half of marriage trying to get our wife to become more like a man. And she's spending the first half of marriage trying to get a man to become more like a woman. And so that's what depolarizes a relationship.
Yeah, for sure.
And it leads to a lot of dysfunction. And so, just appreciating the femininity for what it is. And instead of wishing it would change, just say, well, what does that mean for me? How do I want to respond to this wildness and the occasional sense of chaos that is the feminine? And then learn to dance with it. It's actually something really enjoyable after you stop judging it, because it's really exciting, actually.
Yes.
I heard the hesitation in that.
Well, what you're hearing is, my current work, my progress. What am I working on right now? Acceptance is a big one, right? Acceptance for what is around me and I think that's the antidote to judgment is acceptance. The antidote to judgment is unconditional high regard and acceptance. There cannot be any judgment where there is unconditional regard and acceptance in its place.
Yeah, but I'm going to but you, because that's how I know listeners do this, right? Yeah, but is it bad to have morals and values and things you think are right and wrong? Again, aren't you going to be a pushover if you stop judging?
No. Here's the thing that I got hung up on for so long. That acceptance meant approval, right? Whenever you accepted something, it meant that you also approved of it simultaneously. Look, just because you accept it doesn't mean you always have to approve of it, lock, stock, and barrel. I mean, that's actually a healthy thing. Maybe you do approve of the thing that's happening in front of you, and you can accept it too, but you can also accept what is without necessarily approving. But that's when a man, if he can get curious and not be defensive and secure and calm in who he is, he can explore that. I can do that way better now than I could 4 years ago. I don't have to approve of it to accept that it is happening in front of my eyes. And I can learn to get more curious. That's an edge for me. That's an edge of my growth where I want to push beyond and keep working on. And I couldn't have done it 3 years ago. I had to learn about a lot of other principles to get to this point. But that's where I see growth happening in my life, is just learning to live in that better. I'm okay with the fact that I haven't mastered it right now.
Sure.
Learning it.
I don't know that there is. I don't see mastery as never judging. For me, mastery is knowing the tools to use when I find myself judging and not getting hung up there very long. But also, paradoxically, I believe community is necessary for that, because I will inevitably get caught in the trap of my own head sometimes. And so this is what I've really learned to appreciate, the value of relationships and showing me where I'm judging.
Mm-hmm.
And I find good brothers have that role to play.
I agree. And to have another man call that out for you, it's very potent. It's very powerful. To have another man help you see that used to happen in our society, but it's gone. But having group that you can be in and have that thing happen for you in your life, to having somebody point that out for you
without judgment, which is interesting.
Without judgment, right?
Yeah.
Without judgment, just from pure love and regard. I mean, it's incredibly powerful. I think men need it. Men need to be challenged. Women don't need to be challenged in this way. They respond differently, as I'm learning.
Well, maybe I believe women do need to be challenged personally, but that the mechanisms that you use to challenge a woman are a little bit different than with men.
I agree.
And the proportion, I like to say 90-10. Men flourish, generally speaking, I'm speaking very broadly, with about 10% empathy, 90% challenge. Meaning challenge is a love language for men because we recognize the potency it is in actually moving us forward. And women, that's flipped. Women, it's like 90% presence and compassion and empathy.
Yeah.
And occasionally intelligent solutions.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. To be seen and to be heard and to be recognized.
Yeah.
That's a woman's needs. Good.
Yeah. Yeah. So what would you say to someone who, like you, had been feeling stuck? A man listening to this who's been feeling like you felt years ago, just kind of wondering what the first thing they should do. What would you tell that man to do first?
Talk to somebody else who can help you. That's the first thing you do. I think obviously you realizing that you're there. We're talking about men who have some self-awareness and know that maybe there's a problem. Maybe they've not come to realize that a lot of it's within themselves. But no, the first thing you do is you need to talk to somebody. You need to have a really good open conversation with somebody who cares about making a difference. And I would say that person would be you and other people who are the coaches in the group who have been trained and know how to do this.
Well, I appreciate the nod of confidence there. But yeah, I think really anybody who you recognize in your life looks like they know how to not be stuck, right? Which there are those men. I struggled when I was feeling like this too, to find men, and it took me quite some time to find them. But I found a common denominator is really any man who's refusing to be stuck in his life is a great place to start.
Yeah.
What would you want him to know as possible?
That it can all get better. That despite how bad it looks, despite how poorly you feel about your situation, about your whether it's your relationship with your wife or your kids or your job, that it can drastically change. Like 180 change.
Yeah. Yeah.
It can.
Now, can he do that without eating a shit sandwich and just learning to like it?
I knew you were going to come back to that.
I have to.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not about doing that. You end up making a different sandwich to enjoy between two people and not realizing that you're stuck in eating what's in front of you that doesn't look very palatable. The turnabout with that analogy would be make a different one.
Yeah, I love that.
Make a different one and eat it together. Something that you both like. And I guarantee you, my experience will be she'll want to eat that sandwich with you. You change, you renew, you transform, you grow, which are all good things. This is not a reflection on you as a person, but you renew, you transform, you grow. You will create something that's very attractive to your kids, the people you work with, and your wife. And she will gladly want to sit down and eat that sandwich with you.
Yeah.
I believe that.
Yeah. So it's like you're saying that before, the reason you had this belief that, are you just going to teach me to enjoy eating a sandwich was because you lived in this story where the world made your sandwich and it was making you a shit sandwich.
Yes.
And so now you see the difference as, well, I've stopped living in the belief system where the world was making my meals and I make my meals now. And I refuse to make shit sandwiches. I make
Absolutely.
I make that really good Swiss cheese that we got out of vending machines in Switzerland, right? Yeah.
No, I think that's a big shift, right? And I think that's a big fear as I talk to other men. I think they're worried about the same thing, right? Like, look, I don't need to be taught how to just deal with this. And I was really worried about that. I didn't want that. I didn't want to just learn to love what I was being served on a platter before me, which is what I was doing. I was eating and hating it and throwing it up and creating havoc and chaos for everybody around me. Now it's totally different. Release being a victim. Stop making your life about being controlled by other people, or you think you're being persecuted by other people. Be the hero of that story. Create it. Literally create that. And it's inviting for people around you.
And it feels good, right?
Let me tell you, we were sitting in church. We have a 2-hour block of church, and my niece is visiting us. She was sitting by my oldest daughter, and my oldest daughter needed to be taken home because she had a headache. So my wife leaned over and told the girls, look, Dad's going to take, the youngest home. And like, well, why is he skipping out in second hour church? We don't ever do. We always go to the second hour. It's like, well, he's been invited to be on a podcast with a friend of his. And I told my wife this, and she knew what I was doing today. I didn't hide it from her. I was very honored that you asked me to be part of this. Scared to death, but honored. And the girl said, well, what's that all about? And my 17-year-old, with a sly look on her face, she said, I know. It's about that alpha male stuff. And I said, it's different, right? She said, I know, Dad. And my wife said, well, Brian, why don't you tell them? Tell them what it is you're going to go talk about. Not just that you're going to a podcast, tell them. I said, well, this is about my experience, about learning how to live better in my own skin. And as a result, be a better dad, be a better husband, be a better father, and I says, and I've learned every bit of it. And the niece who lives 5 hours away, right, said, well, yeah, you'll fit in there just fine.
That's cool.
I really took that as a nice compliment that my niece, who doesn't even live near us, is experiencing something positive from me, right?
Yeah.
Made me feel good.
It's an invitational energy. I think I hear this a lot from men like you. I hear a lot of men's stories, and something that men routinely say is, as they do this work really on what is about the relationship with themselves, it creates an invitational way of being that people love to be around them. And this is why it fixes things like, intimacy challenges and conflict in marriage, just because it just changes the world from expecting from others to creating expectancy. And people are like, well, what's going to be like around him next time, right? Like, it feels good. And not just for women, but for other men too, right? It opens up worlds of possibilities. So
just what it should be, right?
I think so.
And that's the fruit that's the fruit by which you should judge this, is that right there. And that is entirely true. Not just do your interactions get better, but the thing that most men worry about is intimacy restored? Is that part of my life whole and completed? Yeah. Yes. Can it be
that's
different?
actually
Yeah, you bet.
sort of. I'm on the home stretch here with my questions, but I'm wondering, what's the catch? Have you had to give up something? Have you had to go without something that is really important to you? Has there been some kind of cost you haven't been able to reconcile to have this transformation for yourself?
No. What's the catch? What's the cost?
Well, just in general,
I would say this. Yeah, I think the cost is not so much a burden of time or resources, because it's really not. When you realize what you gain, I'd pay 10 times for what I've gained. Yeah, right. I say that, but yeah, probably. But no, what is the catch? Are you, it's work. This isn't happen overnight. This isn't a gimmick. This isn't something that you just hop on a call with you or some other coaches or do a course and like you're just magically better and you can just forget about it and life goes on. No, that's the catch. The catch is reframing your situation to committing to being in a different environment. The life I wanted to create now doesn't happen because I learned a few things 3 years ago. No, the life I'm creating now happens because I'm being intentional about how I think about it, how I feel about it. How do I want to show up? How do I want to respond? How do I want to love? And that gets honed and the edges come off because of continual involvement with other people. And that process has waxed and waned for me. There was a period of time for about 2 years straight where I was like crazy all in, daily, getting with it. The last 12 months or last, 10 months probably backed away a little bit. I had some other things come up in my life where I needed to take care of them. Super stressful with things that I won't even bother, but realizing that the power of the community and sharpening the saw that's the catch. It's not a one-off. You're not going to change your life by a phone call.
So you think it's fair to say that the catch has been you've had to have a certain appetite and willingness to embrace discomfort?
That's a good one. Yes.
Not persistently, but
yes.
But occasionally.
Yes. Yeah. We use the term holding the bucket. Sometimes you got to hold a bucket for somebody that's vomiting. And look, we gladly do that for our kids when they're sick. Don't we? Don't we help them to the toilet? Don't we clean their mouth? Don't we clean up the floor, change their clothes, give them new sheets, give them medication? We do that with a willing, loving heart. Learning to do that with other people in your life, like your wife, when she's emotionally vomiting, and just holding it, be the bucket, Yeah, that's a cost. Yeah, learning to be vulnerable that way, some of that splashes on you and it don't smell very good.
Yeah, it sounds like you must believe it's worth it, right? Because I do think men all have to come to their individual reckoning of does the cost, and I'm not talking about dollars. I'm talking about the discomfort of transformation in general. Is it a price that I want to pay to have the life that I want? And not everybody will answer that.
Yeah,
some people will.
Well, I would say for me, the cost of going through the work of being uncomfortable, of not understanding a principle or a concept, but having the faith that you can, and just to keep working through it, that will ring true to you. Yeah, that's worth it. Look, I can say that because I know what it felt like the previous 10 years. I know what that feels like to be living in that kind of cesspool of insides. It doesn't feel good. To feel and to know what I feel like now and how I'm intentionally living my life and creating, you darn right I would do that. I would do it again to get to where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
Worth it.
Awesome. Well, last kind of question is, what's been the most surprising or rewarding part of this journey? And I want to emphasize surprising. Like, what is something that's taken place that you just didn't see coming? or that you never expected to gain when you had that first phone call with Steve or myself? Or
Yeah, I would say this, that I thought that I just needed to learn something to fix something outside of me, right? Give me the tool, give me the conversation hack, give me the debate trick to help me win the argument. And I thought it was all outside of me. And really, the most surprising thing about this work was, wow, it was all inside to begin with. And the fix was all in here. I just need to uncover it. That's been the most surprising thing, that to come back to my default state is all I needed to learn how to do.
simple,
That's
not
been it for
easy,
me.
but yeah.
No, not at all. But I started wanting for other things to change around me in my life. And the surprise has been, ooh, wait a minute. The work it's an inside game. And then, wow, the stuff, people around you change. And that's, I think, the power in this is that men have a unique ability as they mature and reform or transform, renew, that it just spreads to people around you. That is it's beautiful to watch that.
Yeah.
To live in it, to experience it.
It's something men almost never believe me when I share with them. And that's been since day one of me doing this. When I just started sharing my own transformation informally, people were very skeptical when I was sharing with them how my family, my wife and family were changing without getting any help. It was like, as I was changing, I was seeing the world around me change, and I couldn't explain it at the time. And I hear this from men all of the time, and other men listening to that are like, how could that be, right? Because they're used to this idea that the outside world is the problem, so the outside world has to change. How could it possibly get better without a change in the outside world? But I hear men like you report this all the time, that they experienced transformation and their world changed.
Yeah, for the better.
For the better. Any last words as we wrap it up? Anything else you'd like our listener to know, or a man watching this, about anything?
I would say this, that I'm extremely thankful. I'm thankful that my life has played out the way that it has. I don't want it to be different. I'm thankful for the difficulties that I've gone through. I'm thankful for the woman in my life stuck with me despite some of my challenges. And that if there's a man listening to this conversation right now, I'm glad you're listening to it. Something has happened in your life that has allowed you to stumble upon this. And I hope you view it as that there is some hope. Look, you've gone through this. You've helped me go through it. And there's hope for them to have a different, or create a different life as well. If they're listening to it, the stars are aligning. There is something here. You didn't fall upon this by accident. This has been intentional. And God, I will say God, the Creator, has designed this on purpose to help you experience this. And I hope you do. I hope you do something with it, because it'll change. You could change.
And I would add to that, as we close, that any man who's been listening to this and who's been inspired by your story, I think one unique aspect of our podcast is that they can join the Masterful Men community and get to know you, find out more about your story, ask questions. And of course, on our community, we have the video of this conversation posted where people can ask questions to which, you'll respond and I'll respond, and other men. And so if you're listening to this conversation and you'd like to get to know Brian further, I would invite you to come and see what we're doing and get to know Brian. He's a super cool guy. I've had a chance to spend a lot of one-on-one time with him now, and virtually and in person, and he's worth spending time with. So thank you very much for being here and for sharing your story with us. And I love you, man.
Dude,
my life is richer for knowing you. My
Likewise.
pleasure.